The screams had faded into silence, but the stench of blood still clung to the cold stone floor. Robb Stark lay still beneath the pile of corpses, his breath shallow, every muscle aching. His uncle Edmure's wedding feast had turned into a massacre. The Freys had betrayed them, and the Boltons had slit their loyalty open like a butchered pig. He was supposed to be dead. The young wolf, king in the north, stabbed in the heart like his men, like his mother. But the gods, or maybe something far crueler, had kept him breathing. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was punishment. He had no sword, no allies, no crown. His mother's last screams still echoed in his skull. Catelyn's throat had been opened in front of him, her eyes wide with something more than pain, rage, regret. She'd tried to bargain with a monster, and it cost her everything. Her death should have broken him. It didn't, it sharpened him. He crawled from the bodies sometime after midnight, soaked in blood, shivering in the autumn chill. The twins stood quiet, not peaceful, just satisfied. The Freys were drunk on their own treachery. No one noticed one more blood-soaked corpse dragging itself toward the riverbank. He collapsed beneath a tree, half mad with grief and exhaustion. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf howled. Grey Wind's head, his head, had been sewn to Robb's body as a final insult. He had watched it dazed, as Freymen laughed and pointed. That image lived behind Robb's eyes now. That and the way Talisa reached for him when she died, their child still inside her. He felt hollow. No, it was cursed. By dawn, Robb was gone, not dead, just gone. A fisherman found him 3 miles downstream, half frozen, half mad, and with a look in his eyes that made the man hesitate before helping him into the boat. Robb didn't give his name, didn't speak much at all, but his back was straight, his jaw clenched like a man who still had something to finish. The fisherman dropped him off near a quiet hamlet and never looked back. It took weeks for Robb to heal. He grew a beard, changed his name, moved in shadows. Word had spread that the king in the north was dead, and the north had bent the knee again, not out of loyalty, but fear. He listened, he watched, he waited. Some whispered of a red-haired ghost haunting the riverlands, killing Frey patrols in the night. Others said it was Lady Stoneheart, Catelyn Stark returned from death. But that wasn't true. Catelyn was dead, and Robb Stark was very much alive. He wasn't a king anymore. He was something worse. He had a list, not written, not spoken, but carved into his mind. Walder Frey, Roose Bolton, Lannister men who drank to his death, northern lords who traded honor for safety. He wouldn't forgive. He couldn't. Justice was what his father taught him, but Ned Stark died with his head on a spike. The game had changed. Now it was about retribution. He started with a Frey outpost, burned it down in the middle of the night, left no survivors, only carved a message into the wooden gate. The North remembers. He didn't feel satisfaction, just less empty. But the fire had been lit. The whispers grew louder. Something stirred in the north, not just fear, but hope. Rumors said the young wolf had survived. Others claimed it was a spirit, come to avenge the slaughter. Robb didn't care what they believed. All he knew was this: if the North had been betrayed, then the traitors would drown in their own blood, and he would be the one to deliver them. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the northern hills near Moat Cailin. The trees here were old, twisted like they remembered the blood spilled on their roots. Robb Stark kept to the shadows, hood drawn, eyes cold. No banners, no dire wolf sigil. He was a ghost now, and the North was full of ghosts. Moat Cailin had fallen easily to the Boltons after the Red Wedding. With Robb presumed dead, the North had fractured like glass under a mailed fist. The Boltons now ruled from Winterfell, wearing the Stark name like a bloody pelt. Roose Bolton, Warden of the North, bastard of the Dreadfort turned lord, betrayer, murderer. The men who once called Robb their king had bowed their heads, some out of fear, some out of greed. But a few still remembered, a few still believed. It was those few he came for. He reached a hidden farmstead by dusk, tucked deep in the hills. An old bannerman of House Manderley lived here in exile, his lands stripped, his kin slain. Robb knocked once on the door, then stepped back, hand resting near the hilt of a borrowed dagger. The door creaked open. A pair of tired eyes peered out, narrowed with suspicion, and then widened with something else, horror, recognition. "Gods!" the man whispered. "You should be dead." "I was," Robb said quietly. "Now I need men." Manderley didn't hesitate long. Within a day, 6 more men had come. Old wolves, broken knights, sons of slaughtered houses. They called themselves nothing. They bore no sigils. But they followed him, not because he was king, but because he had survived. Whispers spread faster than wildfire. The young wolf had returned. Bolton scouts were found skinned in the woods. Frey caravans vanished. At night, fires burned where no villages stood. Robb stayed hidden. He never gave speeches. He didn't inspire. He executed. He hunted. One by one he tracked those who laughed at the Red Wedding, starting with minor Frey lords camped in the neck. They never saw him coming. But the deeper he cut into the Frey lines, the more brutal his actions became. He no longer wore honor like armor. He wore rage. He didn't just kill Frey men. He left messages carved into their chests, cut tongues from their spies, hung banners soaked in their blood. This wasn't the war Robb Stark once fought. This was a reckoning. But revenge has a cost, and it came one night just outside Barrowton. They had moved too quickly. One of his men, a young northern scout, had been careless. The Boltons knew where they were headed. They attacked under the cover of snow, flanked by mounted riders. Robb fought like a beast, silent and savage. He cut down 3 men before a crossbow bolt buried into his side. He staggered, blood spilling from his mouth, and for a moment he thought it was over. Then she came. A girl, barely grown, wearing furs and wielding a dagger almost too big for her hand. She slit a Bolton's throat and dragged Robb behind a fallen tree. "Stay down," she hissed. "You're not dying here, wolf." He passed out. When he awoke, he was inside a hidden cave, torches flickering and a fire crackling nearby. The pain in his side was blinding, but the girl, brown-haired, sharp-eyed, was tending to him with strange skill. She never gave her name, just told him to rest. "You've got work left," she muttered. "The North remembers." Robb looked at her through the haze of pain. "Where did you learn to fight?" She smiled bitterly. "From the people who killed my family." He wanted to ask more, but the darkness pulled him under again. He dreamed of Winterfell, not as it was, but as it had become. A tomb, a prison. Roose Bolton's pale face in the great hall, flanked by banners soaked in red. And in the shadows something moved. Someone, a figure with long red hair and dead eyes. "Catelyn?" He woke with a gasp. The girl was gone. In her place sat a parchment. A map, drawn by hand, marked with an X at the heart of the Dreadfort. A challenge, or maybe an invitation. Robb stared at the fire, jaw tight. Roose Bolton was waiting, and Robb Stark, the dead king, the broken son, was coming home. The journey to the Dreadfort was long and cold, but Robb didn't feel it. The pain in his side throbbed with every step, yet he pressed on, fueled by something colder than the northern wind. Vengeance. He traveled only at night, slept in caves, under trees, wherever the shadows were thickest. His beard had grown wild, his face thinner, paler. He looked less like a king and more like a ghost of one. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of his reflection in frozen ponds and didn't recognize the man staring back. The map the girl left him was crude but clear. There were secret paths, hunting trails once used by poachers and trappers, now long abandoned. But she had marked a tunnel near the Dreadfort's outer wall, an old drainage route, half collapsed, forgotten by most. The North had many secrets. By the 5th night, Robb stood at the edge of a frozen ridge, eyes locked on the Dreadfort. Its towers pierced the sky like jagged teeth. The banners of House Bolton flew high, flayed man on pink, a mocking echo of House Stark's direwolf. It wasn't a castle. It was a monument to cruelty. He waited until moonrise. Then he moved. The tunnel was half filled with ice and rotted bones. Rats scattered as he crawled through, the wound in his side reopening, blood soaking through his cloak. But he didn't stop. Every inch forward was a breath closer to justice. He emerged behind the kennels. Fitting, he thought. Dogs howled as he crept past them, silent and sharp. He remembered when he had first met Roose Bolton. Cold eyes. A voice like dust. Always watching. always weighing. There was no weighing tonight, only the edge of a blade. He slipped through the courtyard, climbing stone like it remembered him. The Dreadfort was alive with noise, feasting, laughter, the clatter of steel and bone. Bastards celebrating their stolen power. He found Ruse in the great hall. The man sat at the high table, alone but for a handful of guards. A bowl of steaming stew before him, blood red and thick. He was older now, paler. His eyes were still dead. Robb didn't hesitate. He leapt from the shadows, blade in hand, and drove it straight into the neck of the nearest guard. Chaos erupted, screams, steel. Robb moved like a ghost with fury in his bones, slashing, dodging, breathing in the scent of vengeance. Rose didn't flinch. Even when Robb broke through the last line of men, blood on his face, sword raised. "You're supposed to be dead," Rose said calmly. "So were you," Robb growled. He lunged. Their swords met in a clash of steel. Roose was no brute, but he was precise, cruel with his blade, and for a moment Robb saw his own death reflected in those cold eyes. But then he remembered his mother's scream, his wife's blood on the floor, Grey Wind's head sewn to his body, and Robb let go. He fought like the boy who lost everything, and won. He drove his dagger into Rose's gut, twisted it, then forced him to his knees. "You flayed the North," Robb whispered. "Now the North flays you." And with that, he slit Rose Bolton's throat, slow and deliberate. The hall went quiet. Only Robb's breath remained. He didn't speak, didn't look at the terrified servants or the guards frozen in shock. He dropped his blade beside Rose's corpse and turned to leave. By dawn, the Dreadfort burned. Black smoke rose into the sky as a warning, not just to the Freys, not just to the Lannisters, to everyone. Robb Stark was alive, and he was coming, but he had no kingdom, no army, only blood and fire, and the name they stole from him. He was no longer the king in the North. He was its executioner. Smoke from the burning Dreadfort still lingered in the sky days later, like a scar the wind couldn't erase. The North had seen fire before, but not like this. This was personal, precise, a warning carved in blood. Word spread fast, too fast. By the time Robb reached the outskirts of Winterfell, the Bolton banners had been torn down. The flayed man replaced with the dire wolf of Stark, but not in loyalty, in fear. No lord had claimed it. No raven had announced his return. But still the walls whispered, "The young wolf lives." Robb stood alone, beneath the shadow of the old godswood, cloaked in furs, face hidden beneath a hood. Winterfell looked different, colder, quieter, rebuilt after its ruin, but stripped of its soul. The heart tree still stood, its face weeping red into the snow, but even it looked older, tired. He didn't enter through the gates. He took the crypts, the old tunnel beneath the castle, still open behind the eastern hills, its mouth choked with snow and ash. No one guarded it. No one expected a ghost to come home. His footsteps echoed as he walked beneath the tombs. Names carved in stone greeted him: Rickard, Brandon, Ned, Catelyn. He stopped in front of her empty space, heart thudding. They'd never buried her. There was no body, just memories and rumors of something twisted walking the riverlands in her shape. He knelt, touched the cold stone. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have died with you." A voice behind him replied, sharp and familiar. "But you didn't, and now you're here." Robb rose fast, blade halfway drawn, until he saw her. Arya, she looked like a shadow of herself. Dressed in black leathers, face harder, eyes darker than he remembered. Not the little girl who begged to train with Needle. This Arya moved like a predator, like someone who'd seen too much. "Is it really you?" he asked, his voice cracking. She didn't smile. Just nodded once. "You're hard to kill, brother." They didn't embrace. Not at first. Not after so much death, so many years. But something broke inside them both, and soon they were holding on like they were children again. Just for a moment. Just long enough to remember they were still human. "How did you know?" Robb asked, pulling away. "I heard whispers. Ghost stories. A man who couldn't die burning castles and slitting throats." Her gaze sharpened. "I hoped it was you. Because if it wasn't, I was going to kill whoever took your name." He almost laughed. Almost. Arya explained quickly. She had returned to Westeros under a false name, hunting the enemies of her family one by one. Walder Frey, his sons, Lannister men, all dead by her hand. She had a list, but it wasn't finished. "You killed Rose?" she asked. Robb nodded. "I made him bleed slow." She looked at him, really looked. "You've changed. So have you." They stood in silence beneath the cold stare of dead kings. Then Arya asked the question he hadn't dared to face. "What now?" Robb didn't have an answer. He had no army, no claim, no faith in thrones or honor, just revenge. But Arya smiled, not sweetly, not warmly, but with purpose. "You don't need an army. You just need fear." She led him out of the crypts and into the castle proper. The halls were quiet, the lords uncertain. They had heard of the flames, the bodies, the messages carved in flesh. When Robb Stark stepped into the great hall, every voice fell silent. He said no words. He simply dropped the burned, flayed skin of Rose Bolton onto the stone floor. Gasps, shudders. One man fell to his knees. Another ran. Robb turned to the old Maester who had served the Starks since childhood. "Send ravens," he said, "to every corner of the north. The king is dead." He looked up, eyes burning. But the wolf still lives. The letter reached the twins by raven just before dawn. The seal was broken, the parchment soaked in dried blood, and the handwriting, ragged, furious, simply read, "You danced at my death. I'll waltz at yours." Walder Frey laughed when he read it. A dry, cracked sound, more wheeze than humor. He tossed the note into the fire. "Empty threats from a corpse," he muttered. "Let him come." But despite his bravado, he doubled the guards, closed the gates, posted archers on every wall. The twins had stood for generations, unbreached, even during Robert's rebellion. Freys didn't fight with honor. They fought with numbers and treachery. And Walder knew one thing well. When the North remembered, it bled. Meanwhile, far from the walls of the twins, Robb Stark didn't sleep. He barely ate. He planned. He sat in the old solar of Winterfell, surrounded by Arya, a handful of loyal bannermen and ghosts. The North was still cautious. Not everyone had come running at his return. Many feared the Lannisters, others the Freys, but the flame had been lit, the silence had cracked. House Mormont had sent 5 ships. House Glover pledged 30 swords. Small numbers, but honest ones. The kind of loyalty that didn't ask for gold, just vengeance. Arya placed a map of the Riverlands on the table. "We don't need a siege. We need a funeral." Robb studied the old paths, the waters that split the twins. Poison the wells? No, too slow. Set fire to the grain? No, Arya said, tapping the parchment. We bleed them from the inside. They came up with a plan, brutal, silent, stark. Robb would not ride to war like he once did, with banners flying and honor in his heart. That Robb was dead. This one would come like a knife in the dark. They moved quickly, taking only those they trusted. A small band of warriors, fast and quiet. Arya went ahead, wearing another's face. A maid, a cook, a stable boy. It changed by the hour. She was death in disguise. The Freys feasted again that week. Another wedding, another pact. Another bellyful of wine and arrogance. Arya slipped poison into the ale barrels the night before. When the music started and the laughter rose, Robb Stark was already inside. He wore no armor, just a black cloak and a cold smile. The guards at the rear gate hadn't screamed long enough to raise alarm. He walked through the corridors like he owned them, like he had once walked through the halls of Winterfell. Slowly, silently, one by one, doors opened. Frey sons, daughters, guards, servants loyal to the Red Wedding. He didn't just kill them, he made them remember. By the time Walder Frey realized what was happening, the feast had turned into a slaughter. Blood pooled beneath tables. The minstrel had been strangled with his own harp strings. His sons lay face down in their own meals. Screams echoed from the corridors. Then the doors opened. Robb Stark stepped into the great hall, and Walder Frey, proud architect of the Red Wedding, saw the boy he'd tried to erase standing in front of him, drenched in his family's blood, eyes colder than winter. "Your Grace," Walder spat, trembling, trying to reach for his goblet. "You're dead." Robb didn't answer. He crossed the floor slowly, ignoring the whimpers, the moans of the dying. He reached the high table, took Walder's hand, and drove a dagger through it into the wood. "I was," Robb said softly. "But you pulled me back!" Walder screamed as Robb twisted the blade. "Did you think there'd be no price?" From the shadows, Arya appeared, face bare, dagger dripping. "You killed our mother," she whispered. "And our brother," Robb added. Walder sobbed. "I did what I had to, but so did we." And together they cut his throat. No speeches, no honor. Just the end of a man who thought betrayal would go unpunished. They left the twins burning again, but this time it was not a massacre of the innocent. It was justice. As the flames rose behind them, Robb looked over the river. "What now?" Arya asked. Robb's voice was quiet, cold. King's Landing. Cersei Lannister was not a woman easily rattled. She had watched kingdoms fall and cities burn from behind her golden goblet. She'd seen enemies crawl to her for mercy and burned them anyway. But when the first raven arrived from the Riverlands, her hand trembled, just slightly. The twins were gone, again, and this time there were no survivors. Walder Frey, his sons, his entire line. Slaughtered in their own hall, poison, steel, fire. No one knew exactly how it happened, only that it had been precise, intentional, surgical. The only thing left behind was a single banner, a direwolf soaked in blood. She clenched her teeth, the goblet shaking in her hand. "Impossible," she hissed. "He's dead. I saw the reports. I read the names." But the North, it seemed, had begun to whisper again. "Robb Stark lives." And the whispers were louder now, more confident, closer. "Your Grace," said Qyburn, standing near the Iron Throne, "there are troubling reports." She turned slowly. "Speak." He cleared his throat, glancing toward the door where Sir Gregor stood like a silent wall of death. "Small folk in the Riverlands say a ghost walks the forests, that a wolf-headed shadow has been seen riding through burned-out Frey villages. Some say he doesn't bleed, others say he doesn't speak. But they all agree—" "What?" she snapped. "He's coming south." Cersei's knuckles turned white around her cup. She wasn't afraid of Stark ghosts. She was a Lannister. The lion didn't cower. But deep down, where pride couldn't reach, something in her began to itch, panic, because what if the boy really had survived? What if the North hadn't broken but merely waited? She ordered ravens sent to the Reach, the Stormlands, the Golden Company. Any house not already under her heel would be reminded who wore the crown. But while she moved pieces on a map, Robb moved through the dark. He didn't march with an army. He hunted like a shadow. His name was never spoken aloud, but signs of his path were everywhere. Burned Lannister supply lines, caravans torn to pieces, minor lords who once toasted the Red Wedding found hanging from trees. Arya went ahead of him, cutting paths like a sharpened whisper. No face, no mercy. Together, they carved their way south, leaving behind symbols the people could understand. The wolf is awake. In villages and brothels, old women whispered tales. In taverns, drunk soldiers fell silent when a hooded figure entered the room. In the streets of King's Landing, children began drawing wolves in chalk. And then came the day they killed the Lannister cousin, Martin. He'd been traveling under heavy guard, carrying gold and grain back to the capital. They stopped at a fortified inn for the night, thought they were safe. In the morning, the doors were broken open. The guards dead or missing, and Martin's head was found nailed to the inn wall. His tongue had been cut out. In its place was a torn strip of crimson cloth, once part of Robb Stark's war cloak. King's Landing erupted. Fear spread faster than wildfire. Merchants refused to ride north. Nobles doubled their personal guards. Even the city watch began to whisper that the young wolf had returned, and he was not the boy they remembered. He was something else now. Something colder. And then, finally, came the raven Robb had waited for, delivered by a frightened courier, hands shaking, escorted by two of Arya's faceless informants. It was unsigned, unsealed, just one sentence written in a trembling hand. "If you come to the capital, there will be no mercy for you or your sister." Arya read it, then smiled. "Good. Let them know we're not asking for mercy." Robb took the letter, held it to the fire and let it burn between his fingers. His eyes never left the flames. "We're not going to ask," he said. "We're going to take." Behind him the storm clouds thickened, and far to the south the Golden Lion prepared her last game. But the wolf wasn't playing. He was coming to end it. They didn't see him enter. Not at first. King's Landing was bloated with fear, the kind that crawled under the skin and made even rich men sleep with knives under their pillows. Robb Stark had become a myth whispered on the streets, a name mothers used to silence crying children. But myths don't knock on city gates. They climb the walls in silence and bleed into the crowd like smoke. He arrived days before anyone knew, disguised, hooded, nothing like the proud boy who once knelt before his father in the godswood. This Robb moved like a ghost with fury beneath his skin. Arya was already inside. Of course she was. She had returned to the capital like she'd never left, in borrowed faces and stolen voices, slipping past gold cloaks and Lannister spies like fog. While the Queen sharpened her crown, Arya drew lines through her list. Meryn Trant, Elend Payne, the Mountains, Cersei, one by one. But now it wasn't just her list. It was their war. Robb stalked the streets in plain sight. A beggar here, a stable hand there. He listened, watched, mapped every weakness in the city's bloated defenses. The gold cloaks were poorly paid. The Red Keep was hollow with paranoia. The small folk whispered in fear, but prayed for change. When he walked through Flea Bottom, no one recognized him. But when he passed, dogs growled and children stared, like some part of them knew. There was something dangerous inside that man, something feral. By the third day, Robb stood beneath the shadow of the Sept of Baelor, eyes locked on the Red Keep. It rose above the city like a rotting crown, home to the woman who had sent his family to their graves. Cersei still ruled, still played her games, but not for much longer. That night, Arya returned with news. A royal feast was to be held in 2 days, a celebration of stability meant to reassure the capital that the crown still had teeth. "She thinks fear makes her strong," Arya whispered. "She's forgotten what happens when wolves are hungry." Robb nodded. "Let's feed." They struck fast, brutally, without mercy. The night before the feast, the city awoke to flames. Lannister ships in the harbor were ablaze, their sails torn, their crews missing. Watchtowers found their guards flayed and hung by their ankles. Ravens never left their cages. Bells never rang. By the time dawn broke, half the gold cloaks had deserted their posts. The people began to chant again in the streets, a sound not heard since the war. The North remembers. Then came the feast. Robb didn't hide. He walked through the Red Keep's courtyard like he owned it, armored in black steel, with the direwolf sigil red as blood. At his side was Arya, cloaked and smiling, like the girl she used to be just before she killed someone. The guards at the gates of the feast hall never saw them coming. By the time Cersei realized something was wrong, her guests were already screaming. The doors slammed shut. 2 wolves stood at the center of the hall, blades drawn, and the nobility, once fat on power and safety, realized the war had never ended. Cersei stood from her throne, eyes wide with fury. "You dare—" She didn't finish. Arya threw a dagger across the room. It pinned the Queen's dress to the throne. "We don't dare," Robb said, stepping forward. "We finish," chaos erupted. Robb moved through the hall like vengeance incarnate, cutting through Lannister guards with deadly precision. Arya danced between them, a blur of steel and shadow. Blood soaked the marble floors. Screams echoed into the night. Cersei tried to flee, tried to run, but the wolves were faster. Robb caught her in the corridor behind the hall, where the torches flickered and the walls were silent. No guards, no allies, no crown to save her. She turned, cornered, trembling for the first time in her life. "I killed your brother," she hissed. "I sent your mother to die. And I'll do it again." Robb didn't reply. He just looked at her, not with hate, with finality. Then Arya stepped from the shadows. "No," she said. "You won't?" And the Queen of the 7 Kingdoms screamed for the last time. When the sun rose, the Red Keep flew a new banner. A wolf, torn and bloodied, but alive. And the streets of King's Landing, and for once, were quiet. The smoke had cleared. The screaming stopped. King's Landing, once bloated with gold, corruption, and the whispers of the powerful, now lay beneath the eyes of the wolves. No cheers rang through the streets, no banners were raised in celebration, only silence, the kind that follows something sacred being broken. Robb Stark stood atop the battlements of the Red Keep, overlooking the city he had never meant to rule. Below him, the people gathered slowly, curious, cautious, looking for answers, looking for a king. But he wasn't that, not anymore. Behind him, Arya leaned against the stone, her hands still stained with blood that didn't bother her anymore. She looked younger in the daylight, and yet older than any of them deserved to be. "It's done," she said quietly. Robb didn't answer. His eyes were on the people, on the broken towers, on the castle that smelled like fire and death. He had dreamed of reclaiming Winterfell, of justice, of family. But now that he had torn the Lannisters down, there was nothing left to fill the void. Just ghosts. Jon was still gone, beyond the wall. Bran had disappeared into stories no one understood. Sansa was ruling in the north, he had heard, wiser than all of them. And Rickon, just dead. Robb was the last wolf left with blood on his hands. Arya stepped closer. "You should take the throne." He shook his head. "I didn't come here for that." "Then what did you come for?" He closed his eyes for a long moment. "To make them pay." Arya didn't argue. She understood better than anyone. But vengeance, once fulfilled, leaves a cold space behind. And Robb felt it like a wound. Over the next few days, the city began to change. Lannister loyalists either fled or were executed by the people they once ruled over. Gold cloaks threw down their arms. Small folk took back their streets. It wasn't peace, it wasn't justice, but it was something new. Robb refused the Iron Throne. He gave it to the people instead, dismantled the nobility in King's Landing, and established a council made up of voices from the North, the Reach, the Riverlands, and Dorne. Not perfect, but better than crowns made of lies. He ruled only long enough to dismantle what was left of the Lannister grip. He freed the North officially, declared it sovereign, then left. Arya vanished too, taking a ship west. No goodbye, no explanation. Just like a shadow gone with the tide. And Robb Stark? He returned to Winterfell alone. No trumpets. Returned to Winterfell alone. No trumpets. No welcome banners. Just the creak of the gates as they opened, the cold wind brushing against his face, and the faint howl of a direwolf in the distance. Winterfell was no longer the home of kings. No longer a seat of power. It was a graveyard of memories. And Robb, tired, scarred, quiet, found peace only in the godswood. He sat beneath the heart tree, closed his eyes, and spoke to no one. Because in the end, he wasn't a legend. He wasn't the young wolf. He was the one who lived, and the North remembered always.